Cole's old pickup truck turned down a dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere, pulling up before something that looked more like a ghost than a house. Under the gray Oregon sky, its rotting wooden frame stood eerily silent. Cole gripped the steering wheel, a heavy disappointment washing over him. But only Shadow, the German shepherd, acted strangely. He didn't bark, but stood still, ears perked, his eyes locked on the front door, as if he could sense something far beyond human perception. Cole had no idea that his dog's instinctual reaction wasn't a warning of danger, but the first sign of a forgotten legacy and a horrifying truth sealed just beyond that door. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. Where are you listening to this story from? Cole's old pickup truck turned down a dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere, pulling up before something that looked more like a ghost than a house. Under the gray Oregon sky, its rotting wooden frame stood eerily silent. Cole gripped the steering wheel, a heavy disappointment washing over him, but only Shadow, the German shepherd, acted strangely. He didn't bark, but stood still, ears perked, his eyes locked on the front door as if he could sense something far beyond human perception. Cole had no idea that his dog's instinctual reaction wasn't a warning of danger, but the first sign of a forgotten legacy and a horrifying truth sealed just beyond that door. He killed the engine, and the silence that followed was broken only by the soft patter of rain on the truck's roof. For a long moment, nobody moved. Cole, a man in his early 40s, let his head fall back against the worn headrest. He was tall and lean, with a quiet strength forged not in a gym, but through hardship. His short brown hair was prematurely silvered at the temples, framing a kind face etched with a weariness that went far beyond his years. He wore his usual attire, a faded navy and gray plaid shirt left unbuttoned over a plain gray t-shirt, his legs clad in worn denim jeans tucked into sturdy work boots. This place, this skeleton of a house, was supposed to be a chance. Instead, it felt like a final, cruel punchline. The image of the eviction notice on their apartment door flashed in his mind, followed by the mountain of medical bills that remained from his wife Sarah's long, slow battle with cancer. Every cent they had saved, every dream they had built, had been consumed by the sterile white walls and relentless beeping of hospital machines, leaving behind nothing but a crushing weight of debt and a hollow space in his heart. His own demons were a separate battle. The nightmares still came, unwelcome ghosts from his time in the service, replaying the dust and heat and the low rumble of convoys in a land half a world away. He was in the process of applying for disability benefits from the Department of Veterans Affairs, a claim for the post-traumatic stress that clung to him like a shadow, but the process was a war of attrition. He was just a number buried in a mountain of paperwork, waiting for a decision that felt like it would never arrive. This farm, left to Sarah by a grandfather she barely knew, was their last resort. The only alternative was a homeless shelter. A small hand touched his arm, pulling him from the depths of his thoughts. "Daddy, are we home?" He turned to look at his daughter Lily. At 8 years old, she was a small, resilient sprout in the middle of a storm. She had her mother's soft brown eyes, wide and expressive, and a stubborn chin that was all his own. Her hair was a cascade of dark curls, and she looked at him now with a mixture of apprehension and unwavering trust that both broke his heart and gave him the strength to breathe. "This is it. Sweet pea," he said, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "This is our new start." The third member of their small family stirred in the space between them. Shadow, a magnificent 4-year-old German shepherd, pushed his head forward and licked Lily's hand before nudging Cole's. He was a striking animal, his coat a rare and beautiful mix of silver, gray, and white, like a creature born of moonlight and mountain stone. He wasn't just a pet, he was a promise. A puppy Sarah had insisted they get just before her final decline, a furry guardian she had picked for her family. His temperament was as steady as his name suggested, a calm, watchful protector, deeply intuitive and fiercely loyal. Shadow was a registered emotional support animal, the silent anchor that often kept Cole from drifting away on the turbulent currents of his memories. They all climbed out of the truck. The air was damp and smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves. Lily clutched Cole's hand, her small frame pressed against his leg as she stared at the derelict house. The front porch sagged, the windows were dark and empty, and the paint had peeled away in long strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. It looked forsaken. As Cole pulled the inheritance letter from his pocket for the 10th time, a formal, impersonal document from a law firm, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his stomach tightened. Arthur Vance, his late wife's grandfather. He answered, keeping his voice carefully neutral. Arthur. Cole. The voice on the other end was as cold and polished as granite, devoid of warmth and laced with the casual authority of a man accustomed to power. Arthur Vance was the patriarch of the Vance family, a man who had built a construction empire and never let anyone forget it. I trust you've arrived at that junkyard your wife's grandfather left behind. Have you come to your senses yet? Cole's jaw tightened. It's a home for my daughter, Arthur, something we can call our own. A dry, dismissive laugh echoed through the phone. A home? Cole, be realistic. It's a pile of rotting wood. You can't provide for that child in a place like that, not with your financial situation, not with your condition. The unsaid word, the implication that his trauma made him an unfit father, hung in the air like poison. Carlos and Dolores are deeply concerned. We are prepared to make you a formal offer to take Lily. Give her the stability you clearly cannot provide. The threat was no longer veiled. It was a declaration of war. She stays with me, Cole said, his voice low and firm. She is my daughter. For now, Arthur retorted, the final word a sharp metallic click before the line went dead. Cole slid the phone back into his pocket, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at the dilapidated farmhouse, a symbol of his failure and desperation. Then he looked down at Lily, whose small hand was still tucked securely in his, and at Shadow, who stood at his other side, a silent, steady sentinel. The house was a wreck. The future was terrifyingly uncertain, and a powerful enemy was circling. But in that moment, looking at the two souls who depended on him entirely, a flicker of defiance hardened in his chest. This broken place wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. And he would defend it, and his family, with everything he had left. The first few days at the farm were a blur of relentless work and grim discovery. Cole and Lily moved their few possessions from the truck into the house, their footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. The place smelled of decades of dampness, dust, and neglect. The floorboards groaned under Cole's weight, and cold drafts seeped through countless cracks in the walls. After an hour of work on the ancient plumbing, the water finally ran from the kitchen tap, but it was a murky brown, smelling of rust. The electricity was a fickle ghost, flickering on and off without warning. It was worse than he could have imagined. Yet, through it all, they persevered. Cole, using the discipline the Army had ingrained in him, worked from dawn until dusk, patching the worst of the roof leaks with salvaged tin and boarding up broken windows. Lily, with the boundless optimism of a child, did her part. She swept the dusty floors with a broken broom and taped one of her colorful drawings of a son and a smiling family to the grimy wall of the living room, a small, defiant splash of hope in the gloom. Shadow was their constant companion, a warm and reassuring presence who never strayed far, as if he understood that his job was to keep their small pack together. In those moments of shared struggle, huddled around a small camping stove for warmth, a fragile sense of home began to take root. The storm arrived on their fourth night. It started as a low rumble in the distance, but soon the Oregon sky opened up. Rain fell in punishing sheets, drumming against the roof and lashing at the windows. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the old house to its very foundations. It wasn't long before the first drip started in the living room, then another in the kitchen. Soon, a sad symphony of plinks and plonks echoed through the house as Cole and Lily scrambled to place every pot, pan, and bucket they owned under the steady streams of water invading their sanctuary. Soaked and weary, Cole decided they should check on the old workshop out back. worried its even more dilapidated roof might collapse entirely. He grabbed a heavy flashlight, and with Lily holding his hand and Shadow trotting closely at his heels, they braved the storm. The workshop was a single large room, filled with the ghosts of forgotten projects. Workbenches lined the walls, covered in rusted tools and jars of screws. The air was thick with the smell of old oil, sawdust, and time itself. As they stood there, a brilliant fork of lightning illuminated the sky, followed by a deafening clap of thunder that seemed to shake the very air they breathed. Lily flinched, burying her face in Cole's coat, but Shadow's reaction was entirely different. He ignored the storm completely. Instead, he was fixated on a large, blank section of the north wall. He took a few steps forward, his body tense. A low whine rumbled deep in his chest. He pressed his wet nose against the faded plaster, sniffing intently along a specific line. "Shadow, what is it, boy?" Cole asked, his voice barely audible over the roar of the rain. The dog paid him no mind. His whining grew more insistent, more urgent. Then he lifted a paw and began to scratch. It started as a tentative scrape, the sound of his claws against the rough wall, but it quickly grew more frantic. He dug at the plaster with a single-minded determination that was completely out of character for the normally obedient animal. "Shadow, stop! Heel!" Cole commanded, his voice sharp. Shadow paused for a heartbeat, looked back at Cole with an expression of intense pleading, and then immediately returned to his task, digging with even more fervor. Cole fell silent, studying his dog. This wasn't a game. It wasn't a mouse behind the wall. There was an intelligence, an inexplicable purpose in Shadow's actions that sent a shiver down his spine. He trusted this dog more than he trusted most people. He trusted his instincts. "Okay," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "Okay, boy. Let's see what you've found." He found a heavy old mallet lying on a workbench, its wooden handle smooth from years of use. He walked over to the spot where Shadow was digging and tapped the wall. It returned a dull, solid thud. He moved a few feet to the left and tapped again. This time, the sound was different. Hollow. With a deep breath, he swung the mallet. The plaster cracked on the first hit and shattered on the second, exploding outward in a cloud of white dust. Lily coughed, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Cole worked quickly, pulling away the crumbling plaster and the old wooden laths behind it. And then he saw it. A dark rectangular void in the wall, a space that should not have been there. He took his flashlight and aimed its beam into the darkness. The light fell upon a collection of bundles, carefully wrapped in thick black oilcloth to protect them from the damp. Beside the bundles sat a small, strange object. With a sense of reverence, Cole reached into the hidden compartment and carefully pulled one of the bundles out, followed by the object. He set them on a clear section of the workbench. As he unwrapped the oilcloth, he revealed a thick, leather-bound journal and a stack of papers covered in precise, intricate drawings. They were blueprints. He then turned his attention to the object. It was a model, beautifully crafted from wood and metal, of a small, futuristic aircraft. A drone. The days that followed the discovery were filled with a quiet, obsessive energy. After Lily was safely asleep in the main house, tucked into a sleeping bag that served as her temporary bed, Cole would retreat to the workshop. With Shadow lying faithfully at his feet and a single lantern casting a warm, flickering glow across the workbench, he would lose himself in the world of Sarah's grandfather, a man named Thomas. He carefully turned the fragile, yellowed pages of the journals, his rough fingers tracing the elegant, looping handwriting. The man who emerged from those pages was not the eccentric recluse he had been led to believe. Thomas was a visionary, an aerospace engineer with a mind that soared. His entries were filled with complex equations, passionate observations about aerodynamics, and a profound desire to use technology for good. Cole was stunned. The blueprints and notes detailed a revolutionary humanitarian drone system. It wasn't a weapon of war, but an instrument of mercy. Thomas had designed a drone with a unique gyroscopic stabilization system, allowing it to fly with incredible stability in treacherous weather conditions that would ground other aircraft. Its purpose, laid out in passionate detail, was to deliver medical supplies to remote, disaster-stricken areas or to use advanced thermal imaging to locate people lost in the wilderness. It was a work of pure genius, decades ahead of its time. But as Cole read further, the tone of the journal shifted. A deep sadness and a weary paranoia began to creep into the entries. Thomas wrote of presenting his designs to a major corporation, hoping for a partnership to bring his vision to life. Instead, he was met with deceit. He described how the company's engineers tried to pick apart his work, how their lawyers tried to trap him in confusing contracts. He realized they didn't want a partner. They wanted to steal his life's work. The journal spoke of veiled threats, of cars parked outside his home, of the chilling sense that he was being watched. Fearing his invention would be stolen and corrupted, he made a difficult choice. He retreated from the world, hiding his legacy behind a wall, hoping that one day it might fall into the right hands. A few days later, the crunch of tires on the gravel road announced an unexpected visitor. A sleek black sedan, so clean it seemed to absorb the light, pulled up near Cole's battered truck. A man in his 50s stepped out, dressed in a tailored gray suit that probably cost more than everything Cole owned. He was trim, with neatly combed dark hair and a polished smile that didn't quite reach his cool, calculating eyes. "Cole?" the man asked, extending a hand. "My name is Mr. Henderson. I represent a group of investors." Cole shook the man's hand. It was soft and dry. "What can I do for you?" "My clients have been acquiring land in this area," Henderson said, his gaze sweeping over the dilapidated farmhouse with a flicker of disdain he quickly masked. "We're planning a rather exclusive residential development. Private lots, scenic views. Your property, despite its current state, is a key parcel. We are prepared to make you a very generous offer to take it off your hands, $200,000. The number struck Cole like a physical blow. It was an impossible sum. It was a lifeline. It was a way out of the debt, out of the poverty, out of the endless waiting for a letter from the VA. It was enough to buy a proper house in town, to give Lily the stable childhood she deserved. Before he could form a response, the screen door of the house creaked open, and Lily peeked out, her curiosity piqued by the fancy car. "Well, hello there," Henderson said, his smile widening as he turned to her. "And who might this lovely young lady be?" As he took a step toward the porch, something shifted. Shadow, who had been sitting quietly by Cole's side, rose to his feet in a single, fluid motion. He didn't bark or snarl. He simply moved, placing his solid body directly between the strange man and the little girl on the porch. A low growl, more a vibration than a sound, rumbled deep in his chest. His silver-gray fur bristled slightly, and his intelligent eyes were locked on Henderson, unwavering and filled with a cold, clear warning. Henderson froze, his smile faltering. "Quite the protector you have there." "He's a good judge of character," Cole said quietly, his own instincts flaring to life. He knew his dog. Shadow was gentle with strangers, friendly to neighbors. This reaction, this silent, resolute barrier, was something Cole had never seen before. It was a red flag, a signal that his soldier's intuition had been screaming at him since the man had stated the price. Mr. Henderson quickly regained his composure, handing Cole a glossy business card. "The offer stands. Think it over. It would solve a lot of problems for a man in your position." With a final, brief nod, he returned to his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and a heavy silence in his wake. That night, Cole couldn't rest. He paced the creaking floor of the living room, the developer's business card feeling heavy in his hand. $200,000, the words echoed in his mind. It was freedom. An end to the medical debt that haunted his every waking moment. A real bedroom for Lily. A future. But then another image would surface. Thomas's elegant handwriting describing his fear of corporate thieves. And stronger than anything was the memory of Shadow, standing like a stone wall, his body a shield for Lily. He trusted his dog's judgment implicitly. That growl wasn't just an animal's reaction, it was an alarm. Cole stood at the window, looking out at the dark workshop that held a genius's secret legacy. He was caught in an impossible choice between the desperate practical need for an escape and the powerful, unshakable feeling that he was standing on the precipice of a much larger and more dangerous truth. The developer's business card sat on the rickety kitchen table for 2 days, a glossy promise of an easy escape. Cole looked at it every morning, the crisp white rectangle, a stark contrast to the peeling paint and faded wood of his surroundings. The $200,000 it represented was a constant, nagging temptation. It was food on the table, a new roof, a future for Lily free from the shadow of his own struggles. But every time he considered picking up the phone, the image of Shadow would rise in his mind, a silent, silver-gray sentinel standing guard. His gut, an instinct honed on the battlefield, told him that a clean escape was rarely what it seemed. On the third morning, he made a decision. He threw the business card into the wood stove, watched it curl and blacken, and drove his truck into town. He found a small law office tucked between a bakery and a hardware store, with the simple words, "Anna Reed, Attorney at Law," painted on the glass door. He hesitated on the sidewalk for a full minute, the feeling of inadequacy washing over him. He had no money for a lawyer. But the thought of Arthur Vance's condescending voice pushed him forward. He walked in. The woman behind the desk was in her late 20s, with keen, intelligent eyes behind a pair of dark-rimmed glasses and reddish-brown hair tied back in a practical but slightly messy bun. She was surrounded by towering stacks of books and files, and she looked up at him with an expression that was both professional and weary. "Can I help you?" she asked. Cole laid out his story, his words coming out in a slow, deliberate cadence. He spoke of the inheritance, the discovery in the workshop, the genius of the blueprints, and the suspicious offer from Mr. Henderson. Anna Reed listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When he was finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen on her desk. "It's a fascinating story, Mr. Cole. But litigation, especially against developers with deep pockets, is incredibly expensive. My retainer fee is $2,000. Cole's heart sank. "I don't have it," he said, the words tasting like ash. "I don't have anything close to it." Anna's professional mask softened with a flicker of sympathy, but she started to shake her head. "Then I'm sorry, I don't think I can." "Please," Cole interrupted, leaning forward and pushing the leather-bound journal across the desk. "Just look at what he created." Hesitantly, Anna opened the journal. She started reading, her eyes scanning the first page, then the second. Her pen stopped tapping. She leaned closer, her professional distance melting away, replaced by an intense, scholarly focus. She turned page after page, her eyes widening as she took in the complex diagrams and the brilliant, passionate prose. She spent nearly 20 minutes in complete silence, utterly absorbed. Finally, she looked up at him, and her eyes were no longer weary. They were alight with a fierce fire. "This is extraordinary," she whispered. "This man was a visionary." She looked from the journal to Cole, her decision made. "Okay, Mr. Cole, I'll take your case. We'll do it on contingency. That means I don't get paid unless we win. But I have a feeling there's a much bigger story here, and we're going to find it." The next few weeks were a quiet storm of activity. Anna dove into public records, corporate archives, and legal databases with the tenacity of a bulldog. Cole tried to make the farm more habitable, all while a small seed of hope began to grow within him. The call from Anna came late one afternoon. "Cole, I found it," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and fury. The rival company Thomas mentioned in his journals. It was a shell corporation called Aero Futures Tech. It was founded in 1973 and dissolved in 1975. "So they were real," Cole said. "They were real, but they weren't a rival," Anna replied, her voice dropping. "Cole," I pulled the incorporation documents. "There was only one officer, one registered agent for Aero Futures Tech. It was a young, ambitious developer who was just starting to build his empire. It was Arthur Vance. The phone felt cold against Cole's ear. The betrayal was so much deeper than he had imagined. It wasn't just a corporate thief. It was family. Arthur had created a fake company to threaten and intimidate his own wife's grandfather, all to steal the man's life's work. That weekend, the weight of that truth felt heavy on Cole's shoulders. He sat on the porch steps, watching Lily play fetch with Shadow in the sun-dappled yard. They were near a massive, ancient oak tree that stood like a silent guardian over the property. Lily threw a tennis ball, and it landed near the base of the tree. Shadow bounded after it, but as he reached the spot, he skidded to a halt. He ignored the ball completely. His nose went to the ground, and he began to sniff frantically at the gnarled roots of the old oak. And then he began to dig. Cole recognized the behavior instantly. It was the same obsessive urgency from the workshop. "Shadow, what is it?" he called, getting to his feet. He grabbed a shovel from the barn. The dog was digging with purpose, dirt flying from between his paws. Cole took over, plunging the shovel into the soft earth. After a few minutes of digging, it hit something hard with a loud, metallic clang. Working carefully, he unearthed a small, rusted metal box. It was heavy and sealed tight. He carried it to the workshop and used a crowbar to pry the lid open. Inside, resting on a bed of what looked like faded velvet, was a stack of documents, perfectly preserved. On top was a formal contract, signed in 1974, detailing the sale and transfer of all patents and technologies from Thomas to Arthur Vance for the symbolic sum of $1. And folded neatly inside the contract was a handwritten letter. Cole's hands trembled as he unfolded it. It was from Thomas, addressed to Arthur. It spoke of his dreams, his trust, his faith that Arthur, as family, would protect his invention and use it for the good of humanity. "I place my life's work in your hands." The last line read, "knowing you will be its honorable steward." The heartbreaking sincerity of those words, laid bare next to the cold reality of the 50-year betrayal, was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. It was the smoking gun. The discovery of the metal box changed everything. The faded ink on the 50-year-old letter was a testament to a trust that had been cruelly betrayed, and the signed contract was the weapon they had been searching for. In Anna Reed's modest office, she laid the documents out on her desk with the reverence a historian might give to a priceless artifact. Her initial excitement had settled into a cold, determined fury. Armed with this irrefutable proof, she filed a comprehensive lawsuit against Arthur Vance and Vance Construction, alleging fraud, breach of contract, and decades of unjust enrichment. The first shot in a war for a stolen legacy had been fired. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Vance's empire, a behemoth built on power and influence, did not flinch. It mobilized. Within a week, Anna's small office was buried under an avalanche of paperwork from Vance's high-priced legal team. They filed motions to dismiss, motions to compel, motions for summary judgment. They demanded endless depositions and buried Anna in thousands of pages of irrelevant discovery requests. It was a classic strategy of the powerful. They weren't fighting the facts of the case. They were fighting Cole's empty wallet. Anna explained it to Cole over the phone, her voice tight with frustration. "They know we can't match them dollar for dollar. They're trying to bleed us dry. To make this so expensive and so exhausting that you'll have no choice but to give up." Cole felt the pressure mounting, a familiar feeling of being outgunned and outmaneuvered. But Anna's resolve was a fire that warmed his own. But Vance's lawyers did not stop at legal maneuvering. They decided to make the fight personal and cruel. One quiet afternoon, as Cole was repairing the front porch steps, a nondescript sedan pulled into the driveway. A woman in her 40s with tired but observant eyes stepped out, holding a clipboard like a shield. She introduced herself as Miss Albright from the Oregon Department of Human Services, Child Protective Services Division. She was there, she explained in a calm, professional voice, because of an anonymous complaint. A report had been filed expressing serious concern for Lily's welfare. Cole felt the blood drain from his face. Miss Albright continued, reading from her notes. The report cites unsafe and derelict living conditions, and, concerns about the father's emotional and mental stability due to his military service and potential untreated PTSD. It was a devastating blow, a precisely aimed shot at his deepest vulnerability. They were using his service against him. They were trying to paint him as an unstable veteran, an unfit father. He felt a surge of white-hot rage, but years of military discipline took over, encasing the fury in ice. He could not afford to lose control. He had to be calm, cooperative. He invited Miss Albright inside, his voice steady despite the terror coiling in his gut. Lily, sensing the tension, came and stood by his side, her small hand finding his. Shadow, ever the guardian, moved to stand protectively in front of her, his gaze fixed on the stranger, a silent, unblinking sentinel. Miss Albright made notes about the leaks, the unfinished repairs, and asked Cole a series of pointed questions about his sleep, his moods, and his ability to care for his daughter. The entire visit was a carefully orchestrated violation, designed to break him. After she left, Cole sank onto the porch steps, his head in his hands. For the first time, he felt the true weight of despair. They could take everything, but not Lily. Never Lily. That evening, he sat with his daughter and explained, in the simplest terms he could, that some people were trying to cause trouble for them. He looked into her trusting brown eyes and promised her, "Nobody is ever going to take you away from me. We're a team. You, me, and Shadow. We'll get through this." From that day forward, a new resolve settled over him. He would not be a victim. He channeled all his fear and anger into action. Every spare moment was spent fixing the house, not just for them, but for the next inspector's visit. He patched walls, painted, fixed the plumbing, and documented every single repair with photographs. He was preparing for battle, creating a fortress of evidence to defend his family. The quiet man wrestling with his demons was replaced by the soldier, focused, determined, and refusing to surrender. The fight in the courtroom became a direct reflection of this resolve. The preliminary hearing was a stark illustration of the war they were in. It was David versus Goliath. Anna stood with her single worn briefcase, facing a polished oak table surrounded by a team of 8 immaculate lawyers from Vance's firm. At their center sat Arthur Vance himself, looking at Cole with an expression of cold, bored contempt. But when Cole met his gaze, the old man did not see the broken, desperate man he had tried to create. He saw a soldier. He saw a father who had been pushed too far. And for the first time, in Arthur Vance's cold eyes, Cole saw a flicker of something he hadn't seen before: uncertainty. The battle was far from over, but the lines had been drawn, and Cole would not be broken. The courtroom on the final day was a chamber of suffocating silence. Every seat was filled. Cole sat beside Anna, his hands resting on his knees to keep them from shaking. Across the aisle, Arthur Vance sat rigid and pale, the fortress of his arrogance finally showing cracks. The final piece of evidence, the letter from Thomas to Arthur, had been read aloud in court the day before. Its words of trust and hope had hung in the air, a devastating indictment of a 50-year betrayal. Now, all that was left was the judgment. The court rose as Judge Peterson entered, an older woman with sharp, discerning eyes and a reputation for meticulous fairness. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked out over the courtroom. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady, cutting through the tension. "This court has reviewed all evidence presented in the case of Reyes versus Vance Construction," she began. "This includes extensive technical documentation, corporate records, and personal correspondence. The facts are not in question." She methodically dismantled the defense's arguments, her words like a master surgeon's scalpel. She spoke of the shell company, Aero Futures Tech, as a clear instrument of fraud. She spoke of the contract, signed in bad faith. And finally, she held up a copy of Thomas's letter. But the most damning evidence is not found in a legal filing. But in the words of a man who placed his life's work and his trust in the hands of family, only to have that trust profoundly and systematically violated for 5 decades. She looked directly at Arthur Vance, her gaze unwavering. Therefore, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Cole Reyes. A collective gasp went through the room. Anna reached over and squeezed Cole's arm, her own eyes shining with tears. But the judge was not finished. All patents, designs, and intellectual property pertaining to the humanitarian aerial logistics system developed by Thomas will revert immediately to his legal heir, Mr. Cole Reyes. Furthermore, this court has calculated the profits unjustly gained by Vance Construction through the illicit licensing of this stolen technology. The court orders the defendant to pay the plaintiff the sum of $150 million in restitution and punitive damages. The number, so vast and unreal, seemed to suck the very air from the room. Cole felt as if he were underwater, the judge's voice a distant echo. He saw Arthur Vance slump in his chair, a titan turned to stone. He saw Lily, who had been allowed to sit in the back of the courtroom, look at him with wide, questioning eyes. He simply nodded, a slow, dazed movement. It was over. They had won. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The massive settlement not only erased the mountain of medical debt, but provided a future so secure it was difficult for Cole to comprehend. But the most significant victory came in a simple manila envelope from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Spurred by the media attention from the trial and Anna's persistent advocacy, his case had been reviewed and fast-tracked. He was granted a full 100% disability rating for his service-connected PTSD. It was not about the money anymore. It was about acknowledgement. It was a quiet declaration that his invisible wounds were real. The bureaucratic war was finally over, and he had won that, too. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the new, gleaming windows of the farmhouse. The rotting wood had been replaced. The sagging roof was now strong and sound, and a fresh coat of deep blue paint made the old house look proud and welcoming. A wide porch swing now hung where the broken steps had once been. Cole stood in the bright modern kitchen, watching his daughter through the window. Lily, now 9, was laughing as she raced across the green lawn with Shadow, her red dress a vibrant splash of color against the landscape. The haunted look was gone from her eyes, replaced by the simple, uncomplicated joy of a child who felt safe. He stepped out onto the porch, a mug of coffee in his hand. Shadow bounded up to him, his tail wagging, and leaned his solid weight against Cole's legs. Cole looked at his home, this place that had once been a symbol of his desperation and was now a testament to their resilience. The weariness that had been etched so deeply into his face had softened, replaced by a quiet, settled peace. He had found his purpose, and it was grander than he had ever imagined. He had established the Sarah Reyes Humanitarian Foundation, naming it for his wife and her brilliant grandfather. The foundation's sole purpose was to build and deploy Thomas's drones. They weren't for sale. They were for service. The first units were already being used by search and rescue teams in the Rocky Mountains, their advanced systems helping to find lost hikers. Plans were underway to partner with global health organizations to deliver critical medical supplies to remote villages in Africa and South America. Thomas's dream, locked away for 50 years, was finally taking flight. Lily ran up to him, her face flushed with happiness, and threw her arms around his waist. "It's beautiful, Daddy," she said, looking at the house. "It is," Cole agreed, his voice thick with emotion. He looked from his daughter's bright face to his loyal dog, to the home they had rebuilt together. He had faced down an empire and won. He had battled his own ghosts and found a fragile peace. The money and the patents were just tools. The true inheritance, he now understood, was the legacy of courage he could pass on to his daughter. It was the unwavering loyalty of the dog who had shown him where to look. It was the profound, healing peace that comes from taking a broken past and building a future dedicated to hope. The storm was over, and a new dawn was just beginning. The story of Cole, Lily, and Shadow teaches us a simple, profound truth. Sometimes, the greatest legacies are not built on wealth or power, but are measured by the quiet courage to stand for what is right, and the unwavering loyalty of a loving heart, whether it beats in the chest of a man or a faithful animal. If this story of resilience and devotion touched your soul, we would be so grateful if you let us know by leaving a like and sharing your own thoughts on what loyalty means to you in the comments below. By subscribing to our channel, you help us continue to bring these stories to light. Their journey has reached its peaceful dawn, but another story of a remarkable rescue is just beginning, and it is waiting for you now on your screen.